Today I'm talking about one of my favorite comedy series, On Cinema.
Hi everybody, shut up! Shut up! I'm gonna get to you in a minute.
April 25th, Oscar night 2021. Movie buffs around the world suffering from Oscar fever were setting their clocks to Victorville film time, making a fresh batch of popcorn and settling in to view the 8th annual On Cinema Oscar special. Whether you're a Greg head, Tim head, or you don't know what the hell I'm talking about, this was a very special night.
Hey guys.
An event 10 years in the making. Tim and Greg have done something unprecedented with On Cinema, and there's simply nothing else like it. So I'd like to explain my top 3 reasons why I had Oscar fever and the importance of you having it too. September 20th, 2011. Greg Turkington and Tim Heidecker were on set filming the comedy. As with any production, there was plenty of downtime between takes, and while killing time, Greg and Tim would riff on podcasts who they felt were overly self-indulgent and void of any real insight. At some point, Tim decided to pull out his phone and record a movie review podcast of their own, in order to mock these contrived personalities. What started as an offhand prank became a long-running project for both comedians. Although handled differently, with Tim discussing the project openly and Greg preferring to remain in character as much as possible, both approached On Cinema with a level of respect, never treating any On Cinema project frivolously. In an interview with Greg from 2019, he recounts the effort expended in brief props such as a photograph or flyer to flesh out character details despite it being unseen by the audience. How the subtlety of added layers is what drives their work more than shoving in another joke for the audience. And it's this attention to detail, depth, and continuity that gave way gradually to an entire On Cinema universe. The universe encompasses a podcast, a TV show, a separate meta-TV show, an animated pilot, a movie, a band, numerous websites, Oscar specials, in-character interviews, Twitter posts, and live shows. It takes an enormous amount of not only time, but effort from the audience to absorb the entirety of the On Cinema world. Which brings me to my first main praise of On Cinema. I've mentioned briefly before how much I love fictional universes that are fully fleshed out. I like when a world isn't broken down into palatable bites for the audience, but instead given as a messy pile of slop that you are free to pick apart if you choose to do so. The movie or show simply allows you to find out more on your own time if you want to put in the effort. But On Cinema takes this to a comedically absurd level. For instance, to fully comprehend the narrative of On Cinema at the Cinema, you need to be watching Decker, the show within the universe, in between certain episodes. You aren't forced to, I imagine you'd still enjoy On Cinema at the Cinema, but it's there if you want full immersion. It expands the lore for you, helps you see slightly further into the personalities of these two individuals. On Cinema, though, likes to push the envelope for what an audience will accept. If you've ever seen a Neil Hamburger show, the alter ego of Greg Turkington, you're aware of how dear that concept is to Greg's heart. The Trial of Tim Heidecker was a slow-paced, dry, 4-hour-plus courtroom special. Greg's Our Cinema Oscar specials and the Oscar special telethons are around 2 hours long and even more tedious to sit through. The most recent Oscar special had 2 separate live streams occurring at the same time that you had to keep track of. These can be a legitimate burden to seek out and sit through at times, but because of that, I feel that much more rewarded by the comedic moments. And that's not a completely subjective viewpoint, there's actually some science behind it. Studies have shown that effort correlates positively with reward magnitude. The more effort we expend on something, the more satisfied we are with the payoff. I don't think Tim and Greg approach this scientifically, but it is an artistic decision on their end. In an interview with Vulture, Tim stated, "Some of the comedy in our work is the ruthlessness of it, or the tedium of what Greg might be doing. So there should be a level of frustration there that's funny." There's so much of On Cinema that gets funnier and funnier the more you explore it. It ages like a fine wine, and the effort expended to discover more makes it taste sweeter. Or more bitter. I don't know, I don't drink wine. The point is, they ratcheted up the relationship between audience and entertainment to such a level that it really rewards the most invested of the audience, which is why they have such a small but passionate fan base. It's not a sweet, sugary Disney confection, a turn-your-brain-off popcorn movie, although Greg would kill me for saying that. but the real Greg, out of character, would agree with me. In an interview from 2019, Greg equated modern movies to a parade of lobotomized films, previously for adults but now geared towards adult infants, made for a population of mature professionals who have giant chocolate chip cookies for breakfast. It's the fact on cinema is not allowing you to turn your brain off, but instead making you work for it that makes it so rewarding. In order to mock the mainstream movie industry, which panders to these adult infants, On Cinema just leans in with satire. Every movie is a five-bagger, an Oscar nominee, a popcorn classic. When you got movies like Tom Cruise in them, you can't lose. And that's On Cinema at the surface level, or what it started as. It comes across immediately and it's humorous in doing so. But Tim and Greg allowed the series to grow, their characters to grow, and it quickly became much more. I admit, I ignored On Cinema for a while, feeling it was a one-note joke. I knew Tim's brand, I grew up watching Tim and Eric, and here he was, bumbling over words and losing his temper. I had seen that 1,000 times, I got it. But that was only a part of the superficial layer. See, On Cinema lies halfway between a sitcom and a drama. The characters portrayed by Tim and Greg never grow more than superficially. Like a sitcom, their inherent flaws remain intact, and that's what bored me at first glance. However, it is in the layers built upon that foundation, no matter how subtle, that makes the show approach a dramatic narrative. Past the satirical premise, past the character sticks, there are real developments in On Cinema. So many life-changing events happen to these characters. There's so much conflict between Tim, Greg, and the supporting cast. So much goes on in this world, but the majority, if not entirety of it, happens off-screen. We are only exposed to their world in these 10 or so minutes per episode, where they're supposed to be talking about movies, but their personal lives can't help but bleed through. We get to observe the characters' lives over the course of nearly a decade through a tiny show they share. And it's in the added layers added slowly year after year through character choices and ordeals that make each joke land with such weight. Each time a joke is repeated, every time Star Trek II is brought up, it's enhanced by each past iteration. Jokes with history behind them, something you've seen evolve. For instance, Greg remarks how he'd love to see Kramer vs. Kramer 2 in episode 22 of the podcast back in 2012. 7 years later, during the 6th annual Oscar special, we got to see Greg put on a live performance of Kramer vs. Kramer 2. And what a treat for movie buffs that was. But you can only get such satisfying payoffs, such meaningful laughs, if you took the time like On Cinema has, patiently building layers, slowly, over the years. The most intriguing aspect of On Cinema, which really deserves attention, is the audience interaction. With so much effort on Greg's behalf to remain in character, having his own Twitter be solely devoted to his On Cinema persona, it only made sense that On Cinema would eventually bleed into the real world. The term alternate reality game, or ARG, is typically reserved for creepypastas and internet hoaxes, but it certainly seems appropriate here. ARGs are just narratives scattered in pieces throughout different mediums that allow for personal involvement. On Cinema has information scattered everywhere, their fake brands even have websites, and you can interact with the characters through Twitter and YouTube and play along, adopting a Greg Head or Tim Head persona. If you saw Dakar live, the On Cinema tour, or just browse the Reddit, you'd see most people playing along. The meta can be talked about, I mean I'm doing it now, but it's more fun to just be a part of it. Play along with the drama and mysteries. On Cinema has really pioneered what a comedy series can become, and there's simply nothing else like it. I don't have much more to say about this, probably because I'm not really into Twitter, but I appreciate it. It's a full-fledged universe that you can be a part of. I could go on and on about what I love about On Cinema, but it should just be experienced. Honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to do a video on this because, as Greg's mentioned in interviews, dissecting an act can kinda kill the humor. But I needed to praise this show. I'm annoyed by how little attention On Cinema receives compared to the actual shallow movie critics they parody. I was late to the party for On Cinema. Well, extremely late. I'm thankful I was able to catch the most recent Oscar special live, but everything else, the past 9 years, I had no idea they existed. It makes me wonder what else is passing me by. What amazing show, video game, artist, or book that would blow me away is just out of sight. I get recommendations from friends and family, but to be honest, 95% of the things I get really passionate about, I just stumble upon. I certainly don't find them through recommendation algorithms, which do not seem to understand what I like at all. For God's sake, I'm not going to watch Mr. Beast. That's not my age demographic. And Hulu, for God's sake, I don't want to watch Shrek. So I wanted to know, why is this happening? How many people are missing out on something they love? How many people like me needed to know about On Cinema, yet were failed by the YouTube recommendation algorithm? First, we need to acknowledge that there is a mainstream and a niche market. As much as I'd like to argue that everyone would love On Cinema if given a chance, that's just not true.
My stuff is niche! It's not for everybody!
Most of what I find to be impressive or entertaining is considered weird by others. Now, it seems like an obvious given that mainstream content would be recommended far more than niche content, but it's actually recommended so much more that it's become a problem. It's actually something companies like Netflix are actively trying to fix. Recommendation algorithms are extremely important for user retention. Humans get choice overload when confronted with too many options. Netflix has stated that members begin to lose interest browsing after about 60 to 90 seconds, or reviewing 10 to 20 titles. So every recommended title matters, since you have a ticking clock until the user leaves the platform. The problem Netflix ran into is that the majority of its recommendations kept displaying a small number of mainstream, highly popular titles. This is because popular titles receive more views, which in turn increases the ratings left by users, and this triggers the algorithm to suggest it more. It being suggested more increases its ratings further, and thus begins a never-ending feedback loop. The disparity between mainstream titles and niche titles then grows wildly, and you're left with a good chunk of users who aren't being catered to. These users instead keep seeing the same titles they aren't interested in suggested again and again. And this is called popularity bias, and it's a real problem with algorithms currently. It's why On Cinema was not being recommended to me and probably many others. A study from 2019 examined users on MovieLens, which is a movie database that tracks user ratings and tests algorithms. They categorized 6,040 users into one of three audience types. The blockbuster-focused, where over 85% of their ratings were for popular items. The diverse users, where 50 to 85% of their ratings were for popular items. And niche users, whose popular ratings accounted for less than half. You can see the population makeup favors the diverse, with the blockbuster user being just as important as the niche user. The niche user, which I assume is what I am, is more interested in long-tail items. Long-tail is a business term coined in 2004, which describes items that are harder to find. These would be your cult movies, your non-popular items. But roughly 2/3 of the MovieLens users studied were at least 20% interested in these long-tail items. But algorithms can't cater to these tastes. The users most affected by popularity bias were predictably the niche user. But even when examining the personalized recommendations for a diverse user, with a preference 30% long-tail and 70% popular, the recommendations still skewed towards the popular, reaching close to 100% of the recommendations being popular titles. The closing statement from this study states, "Our results show that the recommendations generated by all the algorithms were extremely unfair to users with lesser interest in popular items, as almost all the recommendations they received were popular items." These findings have been replicated across multiple platforms. A study from 2020 examining algorithms for Last.fm found that niche music listeners got the worst recommendations as well. But what I found most worrying was the effect of popularity bias in academic citations. In a research paper entitled "Algorithms Are Not Neutral, Bias and Collaborative Filtering," the author pointed to two studies that found a dwindling variety in the journals and articles cited. You would think that in an age where access to information and media is unparalleled, we would see a higher variety in sources used. But in a 2019 study, they found Google Scholar actually homogenized sources utilized. More citations were now going to the top 5%, the immediate search results, leading to a smaller proportion of articles being cited overall. Popularity bias leads to a sort of echo chamber. These algorithms are homogenizing our experience online. The study on MovieLens users brought up a good point. and that's that long-tail recommendations, non-popular content are a social good. And that's because a market with popularity bias will lack opportunities to discover more obscure products, and will be, by definition, dominated by a few large brands or well-known artists. And this fosters less creativity. It produces more bland, contrived goop. Greg spoke of his feelings towards this mainstream content in an interview with RogerEbert.com. He said that many react with disgust and anger towards his art, it being so unusual, but he has to deal with their mainstream art constantly. That's what I'm dealing with on a daily basis, of being pretty frustrated and disgusted by everything. I'd like to see the tables turned a little bit, so now they can feel the revulsion that I feel when I walk into a Walgreens and Justin Bieber and Diplo's music is blaring through the speakers. I'm under attack by bad art constantly. Now they can maybe feel under attack by something that they don't relate to and is alienating to them. And guess what? They get to go back to feeling pretty good about most things on TV and with most music. And I have to continue to live while being bombarded with bullshit. I understand how that can come across as very elitist, but I agree with it wholeheartedly. I remember ringing up one of my friends on a Friday, excited to go out, only to hear the plan was for everyone to go see The Greatest Showman. That sounded horrible, a sugary-coated family-friendly musical. Naturally, I didn't go, but everyone else seemed to enjoy that plan, and I was a little resentful. No one ever got excited about a midnight showing of Maniac Cop or Chud. There's so much mainstream media out there, the last thing we need is a broken algorithm driving the tail end further into obscurity. Unusual content may not be what most people want, but the algorithm should at least reflect the percentage that do. Because the irony of it all is that niche users are actually more active than other types of users on platforms. They are more likely to leave ratings to support their obscure likes, yet they go unnoticed, and are less likely to be recommended what interests them. We really have to support unusual content more than ever, as it's an uphill battle to get the slightest exposure against popularity bias.